Fire Ecology, thank you. Fire Ecology Connection webinar series. I'm Matt Behrens. I'm a master's student at Northern Arizona University, where I'm studying prescribed fire at Denali National Park. I'm also a member of this national safe leadership team who assisted in planning and building this webinar series, and I'll be hosting today. So this is the first of our 6 webinar series that the Student Association for Fire Ecology is hosting this academic year. And our intent with these webinars is to create a forum for students and early career fire ecologists to hear from a diverse group of active and influential professionals, and really to engage in discussion with the guest speaker and other attendees. So I want to sincerely thank all of you for joining us and to convey that you are in the right place. These webinars are for you, for us, and it's up to us as participants to make these webinars and discussions what we want out of them. So before I introduce today's speaker, I do want to go over a quick few housekeeping items. We are going to record this webinar, as you just saw, hopefully, and we'll be posting it to the SAFE website and the AFE YouTube page, and we'll hopefully be doing that the next day or two. Following Morgan's presentation, there will be some time for Q&A. So please feel free to add any questions you have to the chat throughout the presentation. I'll be moderating questions and discussion at the end of the presentation too. Whatever way you'd like to do that. I do ask cameras off and microphones muted for the presentation. And if you feel comfortable and if you want, cameras on for the discussion if you'd like, since it is such a small group, it'd be great to get to know all of you. So let me introduce Dr. Morgan Varner. He is currently the director of the Fire Research Unit at Tall Timbers, and his career has spanned academia, the federal government, and NGOs like the Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils. His body of research focuses on many, if not all, of the components of prescribed fire and wildfire that land managers and scientists think a lot about currently. Some of those things are like plant diversity, fire behavior, smoke modeling, fire effects, numerous book chapters and perspective pieces too. As a student and early career ecologist myself, Dr. Varner's name has come up and his work has come up early and often. And I'm really excited to hand the metaphorical floor over to him. I know he's got a little bit more of an introduction for himself, so I'll let him pop in and take that away.
Great. Arr. I knew that was good. All right. Which screen do y'all see, Matt? Do you see?
Yeah, we see the cover page. Yep.
Good. All right. Sorry, too many screens. Well, it's, like Matt said, I would rather this be more intimate than me sitting at my desk with a bunch of papers that are distracting me and giving you a canned uh, or a recorded talk. I don't want to do that. I want to get to the goals of this series and try to connect, unintended, with you as much as possible, and also to understand sort of where each of you are, both geographically, and then where you are with your thinking about your career. This is an incredibly important time in your life, and it's a pretty weighty time in your life where decisions that you make now are hard to correct later on. And so I think a lot of folks want to be involved in this. I think they will say yes eagerly, and they'll be there to try to help you. It's a hard thing sitting in your seat to realize that a lot of people in your field want to help you and want to see you succeed in the future. So that's why I'm doing this, and I hope that you feel open enough to chat and to answer. I'm gonna have a couple questions I'm gonna try to do, and we'll see if I can figure out how to ask you, how to poll you from a poor man's standpoint. So I'm gonna get to know you a little bit. I want you to understand who I am, and I think sometimes that's helpful because you also see scientists as a certain way. There have been a ton of studies on university professors and their not only their academic background, but their upbringing, et cetera. And mine is different than a lot of others. And so I think that's important for you to see yourself in the future. And then I want to talk to you about tall timbers and prescribed fire. Like Matt said, it's my passion. And so I want to share some of that with you. And if for those of you that either are total zealots for prescribed fire, then we can just have a party together. For those that are, are going to do this with your arms, I hope that you learned something today. So those are the three things: get to know you, you get to know me, and then hopefully there's something intriguing and that you learn something beyond just having a conversation. Okay. All right. So who are you? Tell me, I saw your names pop up. So maybe in the chat, if you could tell me where you're in school and your year and major. How about that? And then I will sit there and read that. See if I can pull that off. All right, Matt, can you read them?
I sure can.
Let's see.
So as they trickle in, so Parker's from Colorado State, senior and
Yes,
under, majoring in under. Yeah, cool, got it.
I saw that. Sorry, I saw the banner in this background, and now I can see the chat. Okay, great. Welcome, Parker. And Elizabeth, you're right up the road. That's exciting. And then Jack, no longer a student. Good. All right. So y'all are all at a critical time. This is perfect. Let's see if I can pollute your brain a little bit. If you want to chat later, I'll keep checking the chat as well. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip into who I am really quickly, and that hopefully gives you a good idea of where I come from and where my ideas and my thoughts are going to be were generated from. And I want to get to talking about tall timbers and talking about prescribed fire. So here we go. Okay, here I am. Annie said they want to get to know you and have an understanding of who people are in this series. And so in one slide, this is who I am. I'm a native of Alabama. I went to school at University of Idaho, go Vandals. And for me, it took me, for those in that phase, I was also in school for 8 years. 8 years in my undergraduate. I took a lot of time off. I went to Europe for about a year. I worked a lot. Anyway, great experience. University of Idaho, couldn't have asked for anything better. Came back to my homeland and did a master's at Auburn University, a PhD at Florida. And then I was the professor for 12 years and loved that academic lifestyle. It's extremely exhausting. The people that are doing that in your classrooms are much like school teachers, except they teach about 5 hours a week instead of teaching 40 hours a week, but their other responsibilities and the pace at which they're working is ridiculous. And you're really lucky to have them in your classrooms. So I did those in California at Humboldt State, now Cal Poly Humboldt, Mississippi State, and Virginia Tech. Very involved with graduate students and taught the sort of typical fire science classes. Like Matt mentioned, I was involved I was the chair of the Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils while I was a professor, which was pretty fun. And then for a multitude of reasons, I decided to leave academia, and I went to Forest Service into their research and development group to the Pacific Wildland Fire Sciences Lab in Seattle. That's a lab that works very little in Seattle. I always thought the reason that we were founded in that area was that we had the best airport in the country, and so we could go anywhere in the world really quickly. And I felt like my office was SeaTac, the Seattle airport. So we flew all over the world doing cool prescribed fire projects primarily. I did that for as long as my body and brain would possibly allow me to work for a federal agency. I'm different than you. You may love that, and you may want to do that in your future, but for me, it was excruciating. it's hard to go from being a professor wearing Birkenstocks to wearing a hard hat in the woods, even if there's no fire going on. In 2019, I came to Tall Timbers, where I used to be when I was a professor. I was a board member, and took the position of first the fire research director, and then moved into the research director position. And I'm still a scientist, although I don't wear that hat as much anymore. I've been involved in the Association for Fire Ecology since it became a thing, a little bit after it became a thing, for about 20 years now, and been the vice president for the last 3. I'm on the editorial board of the journal and on the International Journal of Wildland Fire. Okay, so we also have Jacob, who is a pointer, and Neil, who Western Washington. That's awesome. Where I had one of my most influential experiences in research at Western Washington. And is it Corinna? Sorry if it's Karina. And you're at Berkeley. My daughter went to Berkeley. That's super cool. All right, awesome. Okay, so that's enough about me. You kind of get some ideas. It took me forever to go to school. I didn't take a traditional route. When I was rapid through a master's. Took me 5 years to get through a PhD. Took me 8 years to get through a bachelor's. You can do that math and figure out how long I was in school. For part of it, I was a single parent. I had my own parent die during graduate school. Life happens to you. Came from a poor family, and so I got to where I am in a very serpentine or circuitous route. And I hope that y'all don't have the same challenges in your life, but in general, even if you came from a very different background, we all struggle with life, and so that's how everybody that's going to come through this will. That's how their lives have been. Okay, all right. So if you plot those on this map, and y'all know this map. You've seen this before. I think y'all have. This is the PC2FM projection of fire regimes of the United States based off of climate that tend to be corroborated with fire scar studies pretty miraculously. These hot colors, the darker oranges are lots of fire, high fire frequency or low fire frequency, depending on the way you count it. And then those cool colors are rare fires. So each of those small circles is where I've lived and worked, and each of those bigger circles is sort of where my primary research areas are. A lot of those overlap with places where lots of fire is happening, and a few of those areas are places where fire is pretty infrequent. The last 5 years, I've been working in central Utah. The areas we're working have about 100-year fire return interval, but we're working on prescribed fire there every time we visit. It's just infrequent, high intensity, high severity prescribed fire. Lots of stuff in Northern California that we still go back to, even though I don't live there anymore. And really across the Southeast, from West Tennessee, North Mississippi, all the way to Central Florida, all the way to the coast of Virginia. Okay. All right, Melissa, welcome. Super interesting group. Those topics over there, like Matt said, he may have overstated my areas, but in general, I work as on fire effects or fire ecology. My primary work has been on post-fire tree mortality, fire-adapted traits, primarily the flammability of plants. And I do a lot of applied stuff on fuels management, particularly in the West. And then really anything that has to do with prescribed fire, I feel compelled to work on it. And just because I care about it, want to see it successful. And when there's an impediment or a problem with it, I'll try to be involved. Okay. Anybody been to Tall Timbers in this group? Tell me in the chat if you have. All right, perfect. Make sure that's true. Elizabeth, you haven't been to Tall Timbers? All right, well, let's make it happen. Okay, good. Good, you have been here. All right. So Tall Timbers, we're located in lands that were formerly held by the Appalachee, um, which is one of the very sad southeastern tribes that we think the language is extinct, where they were displaced very far away from their homeland. And this homeland's a super cool area that we see their evidence all over these landscapes. Um, and anyway, I love there's this super cool artist, Theodore Morris, who does these paintings of uh, where he works with um, archaeologists. And anyways, they tend to be correct. And this one is just so shocking. Imagining um, this in this landscape is just totally cool. Anyway, um, so the area, as many places in the southeast, has this pall of um, you know of extreme that occurred for about 300 years from contact from Spaniards. In this area is a very early contact period, early 1500s, um, to their expulsion, genocide, et cetera, that occurred, across many areas of the southeast, and the area around Tallahassee was no exception. Our mailing address is in Tallahassee, and if you don't know what Tallahassee means, there are like three or four different um, definitions of the name. The one that's the Muskogean, which is the Creek tribes and others, Muskogean name, Tallahassee, means old field. And these areas were largely cleared for agriculture, or at least a lot of them were. And that just got at their tremendous presence on this landscape at that time. Fast forward to 1940s, 1950s, really 1920s, I guess we could start there. In this area north of Tallahassee were these open pine forests that had this really interesting upland bird, the northern bobwhite or bobwhite quail. And in the 1920s, they noticed a pretty severe decline in its population. And that was important, one, because people care about species, and bobwhite quail is a pretty beautiful bird. But it was more important because of the economic impact. The area around Thomasville, Georgia, which is just over the Georgia state line from Tallahassee, and in Tallahassee proper, became this pleasuring ground for northern industrialists during the tail of the Industrial Revolution. So they would ride the train down and they would enjoy the winters. If you can imagine Boston, Cleveland, Chicago in the winter when they're burning coal and they're melting steel, etc. Those places were terrible with atmospheric inversion. And so they were trying to escape, and they came here to these clear skies. There were lots of botanists writing about the salubrious air that would heal you to come here, the pine scented air. And while they were here, they were like, "Oh my gosh, that bird reminds me of shooting back in the British Isles. We could shoot at this bird. This bird's incredible." And so they built this entire culture and an economy built around it. And so they brought this young self-taught naturalist, Herbert Stoddard. There was the U.S. Biological Survey, the precursor perhaps of the Fish and Wildlife Service, brought him down, and he did this study, and he figured out it was perhaps the first wildlife management study in the history of the field. He figured out that the demise of bobwhite quail was tightly related to the cessation of frequent burning. And if you've heard this story before, I'm going to tell you again. His findings were suppressed, and his tome, the great work, the bobwhite quail, its habits, preservation, and increase. Its publication was delayed for several years until a friend of his, Aldo Leopold, stood up and said, "This person is his stature is incredible, even though he is a self-taught naturalist. This work meets all the requirements for peer review and is excellent." And so this book came out and really changed wildlife biology. And in that top picture there, this is a classic tall timbers shot. It's not at tall timbers that's in the area. The older gentleman on the left is Herbert Stoddard, who wrote that book there and inspired most of the research in this area. The gentleman in the middle is Ed Komarek, who was the first director of Tall Timbers and an icon in the study of fire ecology. He's one of the earliest people in fire ecology, and many say that he coined the term fire ecology. And then to the very far right, the gentleman with the pipe is Henry Beadle, who was one of those wealthy Northerners. He was from Manhattan. He built a beautiful home here in Tallahassee on the rim of Lake Ammonia, and was really into the science. He was also a self-taught naturalist, a phenomenal wildlife photographer, an architect by training, but loved this area. And these conversations, this is called the coffee clatch, or they would say, Mr. Stoddard would say that on Sunday mornings when he had these conversations, they were going to church. So they go to church basically to talk about field biology, talk about their naturalist observations with Colonel Thompson, who's the other gentleman next to Herbert Stoddard. In these conversations, at one point, Mr. Beadle said, what should I do with my land and this property in the future when I'm gone? And Mr. Stoddard and others talked him into this incredible gift that would be his property called Tall Timbers would become Tall Timbers Research Station, and they would be devoted to studying the vegetation and wildlife of these fire type ecosystems, and really to be this founding spot of fire ecology. And that's to me, that's just so super cool. I'm a little choked up talking about it, as I always get, just because it's so cool. And what they were doing this in the late 1950s. We were founded in 1958. And in 1958, if you could, do the Wayback Machine, this is like peak Smokey Bear. 1958, it's the 50s, right? It is this blind faith in, American exceptionalism. And to me, Smokey it embodies that exceptionalism. We can do anything. In fact, we can control nature. And this bear is our spokesperson for this. We love this. And so what they were doing was pretty revolutionary. They were pushing back on a federal campaign to stamp out fire. And what they did from there was they held these fire ecology conferences, the first one in Tallahassee in 1962, but the subsequent ones were held all over the world, literally. They're in Europe, in Africa, in all over the West, Montana, California. And these were really the precursor to the Association for Fire Ecology. These were fire ecology conferences that brought people together and almost brought scientists and managers together to talk about prescribed fire, talk about wildfire, and to talk about species adaptations. Back in the day, when people still had books on their shelves, all of my mentors in fire ecology had the full collection on their bookshelves, and they would hand them to me and say, "Read this one. This one's really cool." So that was part of their early years. Well, now if you do the fast forward to 2024, right now we're a 125 person organization. We're a nonprofit. So if you're following the path of my profession or my professional career, academia 12 years, 4 years in Forest Service R&D, or 3.5 years. And then for the last 5 years, I've been working at a nonprofit, a very different model. Each of those three has their strengths and weaknesses. And this is what Tall Timbers is now. It is a research station. We used to be called Tall Timbers Research Station. Sometimes I'll slip up and say it. I'm not supposed to, but we have each of these labs led by a scientist with a staff that ranges from a couple of people working for them up to 20 or so in the game bird lab. And they have the historic lab of fire ecology, a bird lab named for founder Herbert Stoddard. The newest lab is a smoke science lab, which we're super excited about. So a lab just focused on smoke and smoke management and the science of smoke. But we're also a land conservancy that has focused on this area, the same area of the Appalachie between the Ocklawahamie River and the Alsilla River, where we're focused on conserving these landscapes. So we have a really aggressive planning department that goes to every little county commission meeting and stands up for nature, stands up for wild places, and then and injects cool language and local planning. And so if you ever visit these areas, you can leave the city limits, and the leaving a local planning area into another local planning area is really abrupt. So in Tallahassee, you drive out of town to the north, you pass the largest, newest high school, and immediately there's a tall timber sign on the other side of the fence that says protected by easement. And our easements are very strong that will ensure that they're protected in perpetuity. Um, we're also more recently involved in advocacy and policy in the state houses in Tallahassee, and part of our property slops over into Georgia, and so we work in Atlanta. And then over the last 4 years, we've been working in Washington, D.C. a lot on policy issues, in particular related to fire. And then we have a private lands prescribed fire initiative that has a burn team that runs local prescribed burn associations and is involved in a broad area that we call market development, where they're looking at ways that society can fund prescribed fire, how we develop markets for prescribed fire, how we look at insurance for prescribed burners, that whole realm that is trying to build a sustainable workforce. We're also home to the National Interagency Prescribed Fire Training Center. So those of you who work in agencies or have worked in agencies, if you're working with the best of the best, they've been through what they call PFTC, typically through our 21-day sessions, where folks from around the country and the world come to Tallahassee, come to Tall Timbers campus, and then they're out for 20 days burning. And PFTC has burned over 1 million acres in its 25-year existence, and is a really valued partner here. We're also the home of the Southern Fire Exchange. It's one of the regional fire science exchange network locations, where they're working to put science in the hands of managers. So a fantastic group to work with that are also based here. And we're also most recently now the home of the Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils, at least the financial home of it. So a lot of stuff happening on our little campus just north of town. We're also a property, a landscape. It's a working landscape that is an important member of the region. We have 4,000 acres where our main campus is, and in the uplands we have about 2,800 acres of burnable uplands, of which we burn 1,600 acres a year ish. So we're burning on a more than biennial return interval, which is pretty amazing. We have an incredible land management crew that run for our 4,000 acres. We have 30 people, 2 of them full-time, 1 is part-time. And this is the kind of stuff they do. I just finished the revisions to our land management plan for the next decade, and in our old one we had this little 3-picture area here with these photo points that are across the landscape. This is in 1995. And if we look at 2014, when our last land management plan was built, oops, I was giving it all away there. You can look at what 20 years looks like in these same spots. It's pretty incredible change. But I love the middle one, looking cool. You can start to see that open savanna in the background. The top one, you can start to see those individual trees popping out, the same canopy that you see on the top left. And this bottom right one looks like a bleeping mess on the bottom left and opening up in 2014. I was on the board of directors here, board of trustees, 2014 to 2016, and I would just watch the land managers work, feeling like they were out there painting the landscape with fire. And just 10 years later, here are these same photo points. So you can see there's a goofy aspect here in this middle top one, but comparing the far left to the far right, those completely different landscapes. So even though these landscapes have had a fire for a long time, they're still somewhat dynamic. That middle picture is almost unrecognizable, although you see some big trees in the background. And then the bottom picture looks like a lot of what tall timbers looks like. Open pine savannas dominated by shortleaf pine, which is kind of weird for North Florida. We're very close to its range margin. Also longleaf pine, some old field loblolly pine that is probably from agricultural fields of the Appalachia, and then certainly from the pre-Civil War era cotton, large-scale cotton. And now these landscapes have really high plant diversity and incredible other species diversity as well. So my take on prescribed fire, and part of what's driven a lot of what our recent work has been, is that um, tall timbers used to be the lone voice in the wilderness for prescribed fire. And our founders, in particular Herbert Stoddard, he had a pretty rough career where people would, talk bad about him. He'd present at meetings and they would say, "Oh, he's a self-taught, he never graduated from high school. Why is he even giving a talk here?" He faced ridicule, professional ridicule. Um, and in general, prescribed fire, even when I was in school, it was sort of like I'd raise my hand and go, "I'm so excited about prescribed fire." And my Western professors would go, "Oh boy, here goes Varner again. He's asking questions about prescribed fire. This is uncomfortable. We don't do that much of it. Let's talk about wildfire and suppression." And so that embodied what Stoddard's life was like. Komaric also had a lot of that. A lot of people would say, "What a weird guy. He's so strange." It's because he was advocating for nature and fire. He was a nature nut. And to be a nature nut in fire-prone landscapes means you love fire. Um, so in 1958, a lone voice in the wilderness saying prescribed fire matters, and prescribed fire, people tending landscapes with fire, has happened since time immemorial and should continue. Um, and you fast forward to today, everybody's saying it. I had a call yesterday with a Senate staff, and they were talking about, "Oh, we just talked to so and so, so and so, and so and so, and so and so about this National Prescribed Fire Act." And I was like, "Who the hell are these people you're talking to? I've never heard of these people. Like, what is going on?" Is because everybody is so prescribed fire, and it seems like we're in this important period where prescribed fire is changing dramatically. Um, we're pretty clear. This map is a nice one to look at. If you feel like the world is rosy for prescribed fire, this is one that's very shocking. This is the survey of the National Association of State Foresters and the Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils. And those color codes are what the state forestry, the leads say about fire in their state. They're the ones saying, asking them a question, will prescribed fire increase, decrease, or stay the same? What's the trend? And the most recent one done in 2020, there's one that's gone right. The data are collected this year. We'll be able to present in the next few weeks, we hope. Look at the number of states where prescribed fire was up in 2020. That's pretty depressing. It's nice to see Florida says they're up. But look at the places that are in that light blue shade that are down is just startling. And then because of the pattern of prescribed fire, seeing Mississippi, Alabama, to some degree, Texas showing the same is depressing because those are places that have long been leaders in prescribed fire that are sort of stuck in this middle ground. Seeing Georgia, which typically is in the top 2 or 3 of all states, projecting a decrease in prescribed fire is troubling. And so there's some issues to work on to reverse some of these trends. And also for the prescribed fire community to come to terms with managed wildfire or whatever you want to call it. Wildfire managed for resource benefit, whatever. So there are major issues ahead for this field, and so that is what tends to push us uh, to focus on this issue. We focus on prescribed fire, but our organization is it looks at wildfires as well as a solution to part of the problem. Uh, a lot of our prescribed fire work tries to remind people that there are more prescribed fire acres in the United States annually, 8 years out of 10, than wildfire acres. And plotted on a landscape, this is what state foresters that have individual data from permits or from other estimates, they projected in the most recent one. Florida is consistently number one. That may be surprising to you if it is, I'm sorry. Um, and you see the southeastern states where there's a ton of prescribed fire. Kansas, obviously they're not burning in forest lands, so calling them, you can see here it's called forestry prescribed fire activity. That just means that it's not just burning over, uh, doing pile burns or burns for construction. This is basically wildland burning, but under this prescribed fire header. The West, not very much prescribed fire, as all of us know. Uh, you look at that blob, this very carefully drawn red blob that I did, that is something of the Southeast is 70% of national prescribed fire across 13 or 14 states. We pull in Kansas on this one that we have to do that to get to that number, but the vast majority occurring in the Southeast. And an overwhelming majority, 84% prescribed fire nationally, is not on federal lands. And that's shocking to folks often. Um, as we try to change things in the West, obviously a lot of those lands are public, but learning lessons for how private land, I won't say private landowner, but how private lands get that work done is a major topic and something that we take very seriously to uh, to extend. If we zoom in on the southeast, this is where prescribed fire takes place. This should be a cool animated slide, but unfortunately it's not. So on the left, you have the public lands. This is a heat map of acres and permits. And on the left, that public land one looks like almost the entire peninsula of Florida because there's a ton of public land in Florida. It's surprising, I know. But you see here, um, Apalachicola National Forest, which is consistently number one or number two in the nation for prescribed fire on National Forest System lands. It's right here. It actually abuts the airport in Tallahassee. This is Eglin Air Force Base, Blackwater River State Forest, a state forest in Florida, and Conecuh National Forest, this blob here. So a lot of burning there, and then across state and federal lands in the peninsula. And you see a few military bases that tend to be strong in National Forest, the Francis Marion, this is Fort Johnson, um, Fort Stewart, and you see basically you can see the outline of every national forest in Mississippi and in Alabama, basically outlined by these. If you look at private lands, it's a different story. You see where Tallahassee is right in that white hot spot where the number one county in the country for prescribed fire in forest lands is Thomas County, Georgia, right there, our adjacent county. And the number three county is Leon County, where Tallahassee is located, the state capital, the location of two major universities, an interstate, an international airport, et cetera. A ton of burning taking place just right here. These are the Albany quail lands of Southwest Georgia. These are the Union Springs quail lands of East Alabama, and these are the Carolina game lands or quail lands of Southern South Carolina. These hot spots tend to be associated with quail or rangeland burning on private lands. So kind of fascinating. If you look for when fires are happening, so there are hot spots and also hot moments. This little, can't remember what you call this, a rose diagram or I'm gonna call it a time wheel because it sounds better. You can see when burning takes place in the South. It's pretty easy if you say, I want to visit Tall Timbers and see prescribed fire, and you say, I'll be there next week. I will say, it's going to be difficult. We can probably pull it off, but it's going to be difficult. I will say, why don't you come in March? Because look at this, March is consistently by far the greatest month across the Southeast. Burning here starts on March 1st. I'll explain why in a second. Burning can occur throughout the year, but it tends to be January to April. May it diminishes depending on the year, but really a really strong peak in burning. If you look at the prescribed fire windows, this color shaded thing on the right, you can see why. The prescribed fire windows are wide open starting late fall, December, January, February, March, and then they start closing in April. May, June, July, August, they start being really difficult to sneak a burn in. Doesn't mean they don't happen. They certainly happen. They're a major interest of lots of folks, but it's a lot easier to burn during these periods, and so people take advantage of those abundant open windows. There's a lot of burning, and if we look at the fire scar record for this region broadly, looking longleaf pine, this is from Louisiana. This is some cool work Mike Stanball did. They found crazy frequent fire. It was the first real fire history, I would say, first real fire history in longleaf pine, and they found fire return intervals that were sub-annual, like more than one fire per year on one fire scarring the same tree in a single year. And they found it repeatedly, not just on one tree, which is pretty crazy. Our fuels regrow quickly. Pine straw, as it dumps during the year, is super flammable. And then if you look here on Tall Timbers, here's a Tall Timbers fire history and a couple properties that are nearby in Thomasville, Georgia. You can see a history of really, really frequent fire going back about a century. The local story is that fire became legitimized by Herbert Stoddard, and our fire history record, ironically, goes against our actual origin story. But you get the idea. Lots of fire happened here, and fire history record reflects it. The burning in this region is not really for wildfire hazard reduction. If you look at some government paperwork for the Apalachicola National Forest, it will say the money's come from WFHF funds. Um, what they're burning for here, and even in those lands, is endangered species, in particular, a couple species that really need frequent fire. They're overwhelmingly in our region burning for wildlife habitat, primarily for bobwhite quail. They're doing some silvicultural burning, to help manage these stands. But they're also burning for aesthetics, and both aesthetics and wildlife habitat are tied really closely. When I learned aesthetics as, sort of reasons people burned, I thought you want the woods to be pretty, and that beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But if you think about, if you flew here from northern Alaska to go on a quail hunt that cost your entire graduate stipend for that day to go hunting quail in these beautiful woods, the last thing that you want to see as you lower your shotgun is, oh, there's a pile or there's something that's a weird looking tree to distract you, to not just inspire you. This is the most beautiful spot on the planet. That's what you want to see. And so aesthetics is part of that wildlife habitat, having beautiful woods that people go, oh, I was in the South Georgia or North Florida piney woods. It was so incredible. That's all part of that experience, not just eating a very small bird. There's the bobwhite quail here in the top left, what people will call king bob in the region, or the firebird. But these other species, all tightly related to fire, whether it's the gopher tortoise, which is federally listed threatened over major parts of its range, red-cockaded woodpecker, which tends to be the species burned for on national forests, eastern diamondback rattlesnake undergoing all sorts of discussion about its own listing, or swallowtail kite, cool species that follows prescribed fires. Pretty common to see swallowtail kites when you're out burning. The plant diversity in this region is unparalleled, the highest plant diversity found in any ground cover anywhere in the world. Maybe it's number 2 or number 3, but 40 species in a single square meter. So they're packed into these very productive landscapes with lots of asters, lots of carnivorous plants, and lots of really flammable grasses. And this area, part of what made it a place to study fire ecology is that much fire historically, that sort of population density with tribes burning it like crazy, lightning burning it like crazy, the fire adapted traits are pretty extreme. And for North America, this is one of the coolest areas for fire adapted traits, whether it's the grass stage of longleaf pine, epicormic sprouting or sprouting in general of conifers are pretty rare. A tolerance for crown scorch, really weird allocation to juvenile bark, or really rapid resprouting. This is wiregrass 2 days after a fire just across the state line in South Georgia. So these are everywhere in the plants. They're also in the animals. I mentioned that these quail lands and this map here are really important. If you look at this burning here and you see that really steep edge when burning starts taking place in March and ends basically on May 1st, well, the end of hunting for bobwhite quail is regionally about March 1st. There's some slight variations, but basically March 1st is our first burn day here at Tall Timbers, our first official burn day anyway. We do some burning outside of the season. And they're really starting to nest May 1st. You guessed it. You see this time wheel here fits very well. So this little small bird here has a huge impact on burning in the region. I think it's really cool because you're getting all those other plant and animal species benefits. Those are not my fingernails, but those are pretty clean. And these are what these landscapes look like. You can see that you can get an idea of the herbaceous diversity in this beautiful view. This is a stand in Thomas County, Georgia, just across the state line. One of my favorite places to go in the world. My first or second favorite prescribed fire of my life here. Not because it was the most intense, just because it was so gorgeous. This is the way track. This is old growth. Trees are 500 years old. Open pine savannas burned. Tall Timbers was in charge of burning it for about 25 years. And at one point we had burned it 11 times in 12 years. So just beautiful, beautiful ground cover, lots of endangered species there. And this is probably what not a lot of people think South Georgia or North Florida looks like. we like to say that we focus on prescribed fire science, and that means something different to everybody because we care about places that look like that. Um, we're all pretty emotional about these places, passionate about them. We work on all these topics. So we're working on climate change issues. We're working on um, a ton of work on smoke trajectories. We're mapping smoke across the southeast, trying to understand where daily smoke is coming from, what its impacts are going to be on public health. We're keenly aware of workforce issues and trying to really lean into helping there be a future workforce that is better in all sorts of ways. So we're tightly working with the Prescribed Fire Training Center. We led their Western expansion, a lot of their Western expansion work, or co-led it with them. We're working on prescribed fire detections to try to look at greenhouse gases. We're working on reintroducing fire, trying to understand how large and high intensity prescribed fires work and how ecosystems tolerate frequent fire. That's a lot of stuff. Oh yeah, and then we spend a lot of time in this place here working on policy issues because we see those as existential threats to the future of prescribed fire, which is the future of these rare species. We're also heavily involved in policy. So I spend a lot of time in the West. A couple of staff members do, where we're trying to focus on certain spots where we think the small investments in our time and our expertise will result in major changes across the entire region. So we're not going to every single state hustling to go to their state houses. We're focusing on a couple places, in particular, California, and then we're trying to build partnerships with other people and agencies to try to magnify the impact that our small organization can have. All right, that was a lot. I'm going to close right there. If you want to know more about Tall Timbers, www.talltimbers.org. If you want to contact me, do so there. I'm not very good at contacting you back, so be persistent. But let's talk. We have some time. Happy to talk about any of this stuff.
Thank you, Morgan.
Yeah.
I've got a couple questions, but if anyone else has them, let's get those going first. Open the floor up.
I think we're such a small group, it'd be nice if folks want to turn on their video and audio. I think that would be great.
What you got, Matt?
Well, Morgan, I mean, just based on the last couple slides, what projects and ideas are you're working on or are on the horizon that you're most excited about? What's getting you excited right now and why?
That's a good question. Um, I'm excited right now. Our organization does these translocations of bobwhite quail. I don't know anything about animals. Okay, I've held a quail in my hand. I go on a few quail hunts. It's like the equivalent of our golf. Um, but it's super cool because when they move quail to places, it means that they have transformed the habitat into something that's super high quality that can sustain that population. Basically, they're not creating a population sink. They're not taking birds from an area where they're thriving, moving them to an area to have them all be, to fail. And it's I don't know, it's like super heartening because these are areas that used to have fire-prone ecosystems that now when you drive through them, you're going, there used to be fire here? No way. This place doesn't have any of the cool species that used to be here. There are lots of extirpated things. Um, and it's like this distant memory of these landscapes. And so to get them to where they could take quail back, and they're doing that for some relatively utilitarian reasons, means that they're investing, these landscapes are investing, it's the states investing, federal government, private landowners all coming together for this. And my office is located next to and across the hall from Quill people, and this is what their conversations are every day. I'm excited. I get excited about January 15th when burning starts to take off. That is what gets me going. I love watching prescribed fire. I love watching what the trees are doing during fires. But during the rest of the year, I get excited about, those big conservation moves like that.
That's so cool that's kind of a really cool way to put a capstone on a lot of work of bringing these ecosystems back to a different state. And like really such a representative animal for that. That's so cool.
Yeah, I think it's super neat.
Elizabeth had a question. What would you say is the best advice for a student in fire ecology today? And Elizabeth, are you thinking more at the undergraduate level? You don't have to reply, but
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm working on a paper right now. It's one of these that is super frustrating because it's taking forever. I hate papers like this, except that it has to be done. And it's about the future of fire ecology and fire science education. And we wrote a paper 15 years ago about the next generation of fire science, next generation of fire scientists in the United States. And it's one of those, it's kind of embarrassing. When you write stuff, there was a mentor of mine that said, publication is forever. Like whatever you put in print 100 years from now, so your grandchildren are going to go, or great grandchildren are going to go, look what Grandpa said. I can't believe Grandpa did wrote this misogynist sentence. Oh my gosh. That kind of stuff will never go away. Um, and this paper is like a little bit of an embarrassment because it's a very simplistic look at education in fire science. It's number of courses. I'm beating up on it. I'm self-deprecating a little bit, but it's a little bit of an embarrassment. So we want to make it better. And part of that is what's needed in the future is not, I would argue, my co-authors argue, is not sort of a more technical, better, like Matt's got all the LiDAR skills and Jacob is doing his fire modeling skills are all next generation CFD. But it is this understanding of being a steward of lands. It's the connection to indigenous knowledge that is very difficult for us to change. It is this being a naturalist and understanding why we burn in these systems. I have a colleague who was in office this morning. He's a communications expert, and he pulled together something this morning and said, "I want us to think about the reasons that we burn. If you're setting something up that we're burning to avoid something like a wildfire or a catastrophe or something, right? We're burning to prevent something." He said, to me, that doesn't sell. What I want to see is burning to get something. And that is sort of how we think about prescribed fire in the Southeast. You're burning to get birds. You're burning to get, whether those birds are endangered red-cup-headed woodpeckers or federally listed red-cup-headed woodpeckers, or it's to get gopher tortoises, or it's to get eastern indigo snakes, this long list of cool species that can only exist with frequent fire. And those are, to me, that's like, and I love the way he's thinking about it. It's like there is a goal in front of you, this target that is going to give you these great benefits. And if you're burning to prevent something, obviously with this, you're getting wildfire protection too. But on this other side over here, you're burning to prevent something. It's a very, like nothing's happened. We nailed it, y'all. I think, well, let's see what happens next year. It could be a disaster next year. Well, we're getting a lot of firebrands. We took care of 3 miles. We didn't take care of 3.1 miles away. That sort of thing. It's it's an interesting psychological thing. And so I think, them being naturalists is what I want to see. When I was an educator, I spent too much time training students on models so they'd be better at models. Make it where they're, and you can't dispose of this student, this new employee. They're too good. You can't get rid of them. And what you miss in that is, what's that plant right there? You know that plant? You know why it's here? that plant has to have fire during this time of year or at this frequency, or that bird has to have fire at 18 months or it goes away. And that kind of stuff is to me that's a more difficult challenge in the future. And so I don't know, Elizabeth, hope that's not too rambling, but that's my take.
you
Great.
so much.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else?
Uh, you had mentioned the Apache tribe, Appalachian tribe.
Uh-huh.
Um, could you maybe share any experiences you have where maybe your work intersected with indigenous fire practices or
Yeah.
ecological management?
Yeah. There are a couple things that Tall Timbers does formally. Um, we're involved in this collaborative called the Stewardship Project, which is a um, Western science, and that's Western in the global sense, not in the regional sense, um, and indigenous practitioners and scientists. And that's been, I think, fascinating. And it's much more of an academic pursuit. We're working on policy. We're working on, writing cool papers about rethinking things for the future. Um, but we have our site here. Our landscape is really important to us. When you drive onto campus every day, if you do that, or wherever you are going into your job every day, um, I drive through this massive conserved landscape, 450,000 acres, about 200,000 is under easement, and we're working our tails off to get to more than that. And so it's just this beautiful conserved landscape. And outside my window right now is frequently biennial burned open pine stands. That landscape means a lot to us here. We're a place-based organization. And so we have hosted the Choctaw tribe, who used to be a Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana tribe that, like a lot of other southeastern tribes, 1832 Trail of Tears, this disaster. But they've come back to Tall Timbers to burn with us. It's been pretty impactful. We're working with the Creek tribe in the Porch Band of Creeks in South Alabama. And in that case, we're working with a tribe who doesn't have the sort of the Western model, the NWCG model, the heavily fire trained model, and they're lacking that, and so we're providing fire training for them. It's the most, it's like the irony on top of irony, and but it's been a really cool interaction because they're buying land like crazy, buying back their historic territory, and for that land to provide those same ecosystem services and to provide those links to them, they need to be working landscapes and they need to have a lot of fire. And so anything we can do there, has an incredible cultural impact, but it also has a practical conservation impact. And so it's like if they weren't tribes, we would want to invest there, but because they are, it makes it really, really, really cool. But we have a large group working on what we've been calling braiding indigenous knowledge and Western science for this sort of mature and old growth initiative of the Biden administration. And in that, trying to think about some of these landscapes and how they were managed and might, in some places in the Southeast, still be managed because of the depopulation, because of the genocide. A lot of those are lacking in the Southeast. And it's a really depressing, both from a retrospective and from a prospective standpoint, to think about what are ways in North Florida, for instance, where it's 4 hours away from the nearest tribal lands, and those are very different tribal lands than we're here. The Appalachee that are still in existence, that are trying to rebuild their own tribe, are primarily in Louisiana. They're hundreds of miles away from their historic lands. So it's the contemporary world is is difficult in lots of ways, but in the Southeast, from a fire standpoint, it's really difficult. So I hope that answers your question, Parker. That was a long answer.
Yeah, you kind of did. Thank you.
Okay.
Jacob had a question in the chat for you, Morgan.
Okay. Good one, Jacob. Whew. This is the issue. So Jacob's question had to do with air quality and the landscapes where he is. Um, they're really difficult, and the landscapes where we are here are also pretty difficult for managing smoke. Um, the southeast, because of there do so much burning, um, since really late 70s, there has been a pretty major focus. And if you think of, to me, there's some sort of evolution. I'm not a smoke scientist, so this is a dangerous question, Jacob. But I do play one sometimes. So the first focus was on traffic fatalities. There's this whole era of smoke focus. Because smoke travels across roads. You can have super fog events, or otherwise you can obstruct visibility, and that's not a good thing. And so you end up having major traffic incidents. It's happened recently in Florida on major interstates. You can imagine the pile up and what a black eye that is for prescribed fire, and also obviously a terrible thing for the people that were involved. And so the original smoke management tools were how to look at super fog and how to prevent it, and how to look at smoke trajectories and travel paths so that we could avoid smoke settling on roads. And then there was this period where folks were interested in, what's generated by that fire. It's got particulates, but it also has a bunch of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, and a lot of other stuff that was damaging damaging ozone, and certainly were greenhouse gases. So that list starts to get really difficult. And so a flood of interest related to there's carbon in that smoke. And then there was this weird thing that people, it's not good to breathe smoke. And for those that work around smoke, I'm hoping, Annie, when y'all are having these, and Matt and Hannah, you don't get someone who has this terrible cough that I teach pretty advanced courses in fire, and I swear those courses, I just sit there and go, let's take a break. Everybody get a glass of water, because I cannot hear myself think, because there's so much upper respiratory issues. It is a real fact of wildfire suppression when folks are sitting in acute situations, but it's also chronic. And society in general suffers the consequences. And in the Southeast, the places where those consequences are felt the most tends to be in areas that are low in the landscape, like along rivers. And Tallahassee excluded, most of the southern cities sit on major rivers. You do a little map of the Southeast, the fall line where all these waterfalls were on major rivers is all the big cities that you know in the Southeast. It goes Tuscaloosa, or actually it goes Memphis, Tuscaloosa, Montgomery, Columbus, Georgia, Macon, Georgia, Augusta, Georgia. You keep going all the way up to Raleigh and into DC. Those cities are all sitting there in these low areas. Those cities where human populations are concentrated, and where heavy smoke in the evening accumulates, moves to the lowest part of the landscape in these smoke sheds. And so the urban poor tend to suffer the greatest consequences. They're the ones with the worst HVAC systems, et cetera, if they have them, if they've had them. And so there's this recent realization that, people matter, public health matters. And so the way that people are doing it in the Southeast is, one, acknowledging that we do it, that we're actually generating this. And Jacob, that is like, admitting you have a problem is the first step. And it's taken whatever that is, 45 years for prescribed burners to say, oh yeah, okay, you're right. When they go and look in Southwest Georgia in a little town and go, okay, there's a little bit too much smoke there. You're right. And now we have air quality sensors that are being tripped and saying this is unhealthy air. So the first part is that, and then beyond that, it's now we have these what we call communities of practice with burners from the private sector, from the states, regulators from the states, regulators from the feds, burners from the feds, all getting together with working with public health officials, CDC, EPA, Forest Service, all the interior agencies, and starting to acknowledge where smoke is and what that looks like for the future. And then try to do smoke management practices that are the stuff that we learned in the 70s, how we avoid moving smoke into certain locations, and trying to capitalize on windows that are perfect for smoke, um, and trying to do our best in those ways. And that's a huge challenge. That really is the thing that's going to define, my guess is, the next 20 years. We can all say we're going to turn around and burn like crazy and get away from this sort of being reactive to wildfire, but when prescribed fire comes around to it, I see the biggest impediment as, having the airshed to put smoke into and to disperse smoke. It's not, how we're going to ignite it. I mean, we might have robots doing prescribed burning for us. I'm glad to see there are people next to the robots, but I think it's how we manage smoke is going to be the future. And so, places like where you are, deeply dissected landscapes where smoke is going to settle in those low areas, it's the same thing. People are not living on the mountaintops. At least we hope they're not. They're living in the valleys, and that's where you're going to suffer those consequences when there's an inversion or anything else. And trying to make it where you're burning that is going to lift that smoke up and out, so there's not this settling in the evenings. And if there is, the sort of that honesty, the admission to say, hey, folks, next couple of nights are going to be smoky. And, we apologize, but you'd rather have this than, 3 months straight in the summer on a wildfire. And them understanding what the consequences are, not sugarcoating it, saying it might be bad. Run your HVAC systems, or, don't exercise, don't have practice this evening.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for your input there, Morgan.
Yeah.
Kind of just to go along with that, how has there been an expansion of the wildland kind of urban interface along some of these properties where prescribed burning is being done? I'm in California right now, and that's obviously where a lot of new construction is right in a lot of places of high wildfire risk.
Yeah.
So I was just curious as to how you manage that increasing development, especially places like along the Florida wildland corridor.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Great question. Love it. We're about to embark on this project. We're actually having conversations on Friday about our next steps, and it is looking at this Florida wildlife corridor, which is this sort of large landscape conservation that's in all the places where you all live and work. You have other examples of it. And the state of Florida is investing millions and millions of dollars. They've always been aggressive, at least for the last 35 years, really aggressive with land conservation. So they're aggressively focused on both purchases and easements across this landscape. And this project we're undertaking is to look at basically how in the world do we burn these sites, given the pressures of development, and how might the design of these corridors inform where future development does or doesn't happen. In Tallahassee, and in southwest Georgia, tall timbers has a pretty amazing impact. We prevent a lot of development. We help with zoning. We are as aggressive as we could be, so much so that they go, oh boy, the tall timbers people are here. Because we're trying to prevent encroachment into these areas that's going to minimize or that's going to harm prescribed fire. It's going to make it where we go, oh, we can't burn with the north wind because of that dang park that's over there now, that new softball field that everybody needed. And so, being involved in planning is a really important part of, fire in the future, because the allowance for those places to be developed doesn't prevent fire from happening. We still burn at the edge of the city here, but everybody knows when those fires happen because it's not like on tall timbers with two people burning a single unit that's 100 acres. It is all engines, all colors show up. Everybody's there, show of force to burn 6 acres because we know it needs to be burned. Or we're just saying it's not going to be burned anymore and we're just going to use mechanical treatments. And that's, kind of throwing your hands up a little bit and say fire can't be used here anymore, which has all sorts of other implications beyond just the species that live there. I like for people to see fire. I love at my daughter's high school, if you're sitting in the stands during March and April, it's flag football season here. You get ash all over all of your clothes. Like sitting in the stands, you'll be sitting there going, at least I do, because I don't want people to, be like, Morgan, not wearing your tall timber shirt. I can't believe y'all are putting, because anybody that burns in this area or any fires that happen in our local airshed, it's always tall timbers that did it, even though we're 4,000 of 450,000 acres. But that I like it because it causes a conversation where someone goes like, why is there so much burning here? Oh, thank you so much. This is a great time for us to talk about this. And I like that. I like the dialogue. And I think that's what you lose when you start pushing fire away from the places where people live. So if you have people live here, wildlands are here, that separation doesn't seem right to me. And that building along that, as you know, just starts to push that boundary even farther back. That's a huge challenge, Neil, in California and lots of places in the West. I mean, I want to live in a beautiful house in the foothills too. I'd like to be somewhere in the Sierras. It'd be really nice right now. And it's hard to, coming to terms with that is difficult.
Does the mechanical kind of thinning, it probably doesn't have the same type of beneficial effects, does it?
It has some. It's interesting. Fire is unique because it's transforming solid materials into gases. And it's also those solid materials into ash that has these beneficial fertilizing effects. It's also clearing space, growing space for plants. It's heating the soil for plants. It's clearing the small areas. And so there's some subtle things that mechanical treatments can't do from a structural standpoint, and sometimes from a coarse compositional standpoint. Mechanical treatments can be pretty important, but you're losing these other added benefits, some of which we understand very well, and others we have not discovered yet. I think even though we've been studying fire, for 100 years, somewhat formally from a Western science standpoint, I am frequently surprised and disappointed when I hear a talk by someone whose papers look incredible. They got a huge name, and I'm sitting there in the audience going, they actually have no idea what they're talking about. Or we come up with something that is this incredible relationship, but the data, something about it, it's like when you're in freshman philosophy, you go through all the rules of argumentation, and then my professor always said, and then there's the last rule, which is something's not quite right about that argument, and you can't put your finger on it. You're going to be sitting on that issue all night, going, what was it about that argument they had that there was a logic leap somewhere in there, and that part, I think, our understanding of what plants and animals, I'm biased toward plants, but what plants are doing, I think we're just, we're at a pretty immature phase for a scientific field. Like we don't understand some major stuff. And, a lot of the work we do is pressing and applied, which is great. But that to me feels like triage, where you're stapling together somebody instead of doing something where you go, okay, let's figure out how we're going to fix this issue and understand the mechanics, the mechanisms. So I don't know. I feel like it's great for y'all. It's kind of depressing for me a little bit just because I can't do this for 50 more years. It just the math isn't there. And there's a lot of stuff that I think we just don't know very well. And like what is fire really doing? Plants tolerate fire for some simple ways that we know about. But there are lots of ways that plants are doing things that we can't explain with physics. And the physicists are like, okay, we got to figure this out then. We got to do this. And I go, they're biological characters, man. They got cool stuff they can do physiologically, internally. They've got cool chemistry that we're not acknowledging. Like they know how to they can tolerate freezing. They know they can do really cool stuff. And they've done it for such a long time. I think there's just a lot there. And I don't know, I hope that's exciting to y'all. It's exciting to me in some ways and depressing in others.
Okay. Well, I have to run on to my next thing for the day.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. And thank you, Neil, Parker, Jack, Elizabeth, like for engaging with us too. This is really great. And even for just a small little group.
Yeah, it's fun.
So thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.